We're now live.
Hello and welcome to the Scottish States hustings for the leader of the Liberal Democrats. We are joined by our two fantastic candidates, Layla Moran and Ed Davey. I will briefly introduce myself, go over some of the ground rules for today, and then we will start with our opening statements. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ruth McElroy, otherwise known unironically as Ruth of the Women. That is because I am chair of Scottish Liberal Democrat Women, and that is the hat with which most of you will know me. I'm very pleased to be chairing today's hustings with these fantastic candidates. Just a few kind of ground rules about what we're doing and what we're after. Both of our candidates have already drawn lots as to who will speak, and they will, Layla will go first, and they will each speak for 3 minutes. We will then follow up with questions from you, the audience. Those answers will last 2 minutes, not including any follow-ups. We are still open to receiving more questions. You can submit those via the chat section on the YouTube stream. We are very keen to get more questions. Particularly, we want more questions on relating to party strategy and leadership. Especially, we have a lot of great questions on policy, but if you have more, do feel free to send those in. I have a range of questions already. Some of them have been editorialized a very little bit just for the sake of clarity, or where there have been, for example, multiple questions on the same subject. I've streamlined those a little bit, but do feel free to submit more as you go. We are obviously particularly keen to hear from anyone who is a member of an underrepresented group. Any questions that you have are particularly welcome, but we're very happy to hear from anyone who does have a question for one of our two candidates. We'll go on for about an hour and a half, so plenty of time for any questions. Do keep them coming. But for now, I will turn over to Layla Moran.
Well, first of all, Ruth, thank you so much. Thank you all for joining this afternoon. Scotland needs a strong Liberal voice, one that makes a heartfelt, compelling case for truly progressive values rooted in federalism as we rebuild our communities in the wake of coronavirus. And over the last year, I've heard from local parties throughout Scotland about your priorities, your campaigns, and your vision. And I'm confident that we can seize the opportunities to begin building a fairer, greener, more equal Scotland, beginning with the Scottish Parliament elections next year, and then, of course, the council elections in 2022. Then taking that momentum forward and winning back seats at the next general election. Our success here will change lives across Scotland, and it's essential for advancing liberalism across the whole of the United Kingdom. The Liberal Democrats have only ever made progress when we've been winning in Scotland. But let's be clear, to achieve this, our party will have to change. If we stand still or keep bumping along at 6 to 8% in the polls, we risk our voice not being heard while the SNP and the Tories redefine our society in their way. We need to make a clean break from the mistakes of the last 10 years so that we can rebuild trust with voters and win again. Because for too long, we have been explaining the past rather than campaigning for the future. My 3 campaign themes of education, the environment, and the economy, and the ideas I've put forward around them all reinforce these priorities. And I've heard from Scottish Liberal Democrats that standing up for families and children who've been let down by the SNP during this pandemic is so important. Fighting for the thousands of people across Scotland left unemployed as Boris Johnson mismanages the economic fallout from Westminster has to be a top priority. Working for a green recovery that protects not only Scotland's environment, but also the future of our entire planet. And of course, championing federalism, but not for the sake of the union itself, but because it's the best way to work cooperatively in promoting liberal values across our 4 nations. I want the Federal Party to properly invest in Scotland's campaigns, staff and volunteers. And I'll work with the Scottish Party to ensure that you have the resources that you need to succeed. I'll also work with you to secure media cut through so that our liberal messages get heard. Throughout the leadership campaign, I've shown that we can create that, making the front pages of 5 different national newspapers and getting coverage in major outlets across every part of the UK, including Scotland. My aim and my reason for asking you to vote for me to be your next leader is to change our party for the better so that we can move forward and change our society for the better. There is a burning need for change, and I'm the person to lead it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Layla. Now, Ed, if you would like to give your statement.
Friends, these are challenging times. Job losses, the climate, COVID, Brexit, the SNP threat. As federal leader, I listen to Scottish Liberal Democrats and work with the Scottish leader to understand how I and the federal party can help you meet these challenges across Scotland, especially with next year's crucial parliamentary elections and the council elections in 2022. As federal leader, I bring both vision and experience. Take the economy and climate. My Green Economy Recovery Plan brings them together to invest in green homes, green transport, green energy with a green jobs guarantee. I can deliver this green vision because I've experienced doing it before. I fought the Tories on climate and won. My work more than trebled the UK's renewable power. We are now the world leader in offshore wind. Thanks to that work, Liberal Democrats have the best climate change record of any party. So let us campaign for a climate-safe Scotland, managing the transition from an economy where oil and gas played such an important part to a green economy, where vibrant renewable, zero carbon and green tech industries provide the jobs of the future. But a green economy must also deliver a fairer society too. From my work on a universal basic income when I was Paddy Ashdown's economics advisor, to helping devise policies like a penny on income tax for education, I've always argued for progressive ideas to build a fairer society. Post-COVID, let's also be the party for carers. In Scotland, there are nearly 800,000 adult and young carers, over 6 times the list vote we received in 2016. My own caring experience started as a young carer. Dad died when I was 4, so when Mum became terminally ill when I was 12, I nursed her for 3 years till she died. Now, Emily and I care for our children, including my disabled son, John, who needs 24/7 care. So I understand what so many carers go through every day. My life experience helps me relate to people, to voters, and to their challenges. In the general election review, you see our party's many challenges, and the conclusion, there are no quick fixes, and the review's sharpest criticism, that people don't know what voting Liberal Democrat means. My vision begins to answer that. A greener, fairer, more caring country. Friends, we can win, especially in PR elections across Scotland. I get quality media cut through, like after forcing a commitment from Boris Johnson for an independent inquiry into COVID. And I'm an experienced campaigner. I'm the only MP in our party's history to win a general election without being a target seat. I know how to win. So please, back me and let's win and be stronger together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. I'm sure you guys will both now be used to all of this without applause, but it's still quite a strange experience. So thank you very much both for those answers. We'll jump in with some questions, and I think since we are in Scotland, or at least digitally in Scotland, we're in living rooms, who knows where. We will start with a question that is particularly relevant to Scotland and obviously the upcoming Scottish Parliament election. We've had a couple of people with similar questions. So Jane Ann has asked, many voters who used to vote Lib Dem because they didn't like Labour or the Conservatives now vote SNP instead. How would you attract them and others tempted by independence back to us? And similarly, David has asked, how would you invite or tempt people who are internationalists and pro-Europeans but are SNP supporters into the Liberal Democrat fold? You each have 2 minutes, and we will start with Ed, please.
Well, first of all, I talk to Scottish Liberal Democrats. Now, one thing I'm conscious of is that you have a much closer idea of the issues and how they play out in different communities across Scotland. And frankly, it would be fairly arrogant for a MP from England to come and tell Scottish Liberal Democrats what the solutions are. But I'm not going to dodge the question, because I'm clear in my vision for the federal party that there are lots of things that would work in Scotland. I think my ideas for a greener economy, a fairer society, and a more caring country, I think they will resonate with many, many Scottish people who vote for all the other parties, frankly, at the moment. But of course, there is one big issue that we need to be really clear on, and that's the constitutional issue. And talking to many Scottish Liberal Democrats, I'm really clear that Scottish Liberal Democrats, and most of I spoke to, want a federal Britain, where there is real home rule for Scotland. Devo Max, if you call it that, but following the commission by Mean Campbell, it set out a very clear vision of a very distinctive position, distinctive from the other parties, and something that we in our liberal history can point to. So I think that federal Britain is important. England needs to get its act together. That's why I'm supporting the idea of a commission for England to sort out itself, because I think that would support the federal Britain message in Scotland. But that's clearly an area that we need to work together on. And finally, you talk about pro-European and internationalists, how you track them to our party. I think we are the internationalist party. It's very difficult for a nationalist party like the SNP or the English nationalists, who are now the Brexit Tories, to talk about that issue. And Labour's also mixed up on that issue. So I think we can be really proud of our Liberal Democrat values as an internationalist party, as a pro-European party. We will always be the most pro-European party in British politics.
Thank you very much, Ed. Leila.
Well, the last thing that you guys need is for the federal party leader to be telling you how to do things. In fact, my job will be to reinforce what you think is the best way of bringing those voters across. And every time that I've done media, I've made sure that I've spoken to Willie or one of our other MPs to make sure I've got it right. I was in the Herald yesterday talking about this topic. And what I've said is that, first of all, I think we do need to keep making the emotional case towards those voters. Some of these voters were our voters. They were voters that voted us for many years. And because of Boris Johnson and because of the Brexit outcome and where we're headed now, they see this as it's an emotional thing. They're seeing it as a way to sort of escape what England's doing to Scotland, which is something that they don't want. But to be very hard line about that union stance for the sake of the union won't work. We have to speak emotionally about why we want to stay as part of a union, why federalism. And I've always advocated for that localism strand of liberalism. It's that bottom-up approach. It's the decisions should be taken as close as possible to the people that they affect. It applies as much in Scotland, and if you're in the Highlands, you feel very much like it's all coming from Holyrood. We have to keep pushing that particular liberal vein, because that's the thing that ties it all together. And the internationalist roots of the party are entirely consistent with that vision for how you do politics. When authoritarians speak to divide, liberals want to have people cooperate. We want to bring people together. It's the reason why we wanted to be part of the European Union, and the reason why we want to be part of our four family of nations, because by working together, that's how we solve the big problems of the day. So let's use this as an opportunity to explain to people, why liberalism is different. It's entirely a consistent message that we have put across. It's quite unique, but let's not forget that emotional case. And my job is to continue to do what I've been doing, which is to understand where the politics are in Scotland right now, make sure that I am rowing in behind Willie and all the candidates who are working towards those Scottish elections for next year, so that I reinforce your message, rather than what's happened in the past is federal leader comes in, does an interview, and then the Scottish party goes, oh no, what have they said? That's what we need to avoid.
Yeah, I muted myself. That happens. Never mind. At least we got that one over with early. So I think I'd like to stick with the issues around constitution, referenda, etc. And a question that's come in from Fred. Ed, you've touched on this a little bit already, but I'd like to go back to it in a little bit more detail. Fred has asked, the Liberal Democrats and others have worked hard to make sure that the Scottish Parliament is one of the most powerful devolved parliaments in the world. But the impression up here is that the mindset of those in power in Westminster and Whitehall haven't really changed. What will you do as leader to convince people in England that the UK needs to become a properly federal union? So Leila, if you'd like to start, and then we'll come back to Ed.
Yeah, so we have a motion that's coming to federal conference in September, which is going to start to tackle this issue. It's a really important issue. It's also, we had the Welsh state hustings yesterday, and it came up there as well. And I am absolutely committed to federalism, as I just explained in my answer. We have to, do it in a way that really makes it clear to people why it works for them. But I think the English element of it is basically the elephant in the room. And I do think a commission is the right way to deal with this, because the problem we have in England is that there's so many competing and disparate views that we need to find consensus. And the job of the leader in this case is to make sure that that commission is properly constituted, that it reports back quickly enough for it to then inform the policy going forward. But I have given my promise to your convener, Sheila, who called me up about this issue, that we're putting this into conference. If you're elected leader, will you put the full force of your political weight behind it? I absolutely will. I think finding that consensus is incredibly important, but we need to do it by talking to people in the party, and that's, I think, the right approach.
I'm just going to keep myself unmuted. Thank you, Leila. Ed, if you could go, please.
The question was about changing mindsets, and that goes within our own party, and it goes within Parliament and the wider political scene in Westminster. And clearly our party needs to get a grip in, particularly in England and in LDHQ. The motion later referred to will have my total support. I've talked to Sheila about it. But I think it goes far more than just a motion. We, I think now, have to portray ourselves as the alternative to the SNP. And the Scottish Labour Party has fallen away. The Tories in Scotland are now in actually disarray. So if we're going to stop nationalism, as we must, in my view, and put forward our alternative federal Britain concept, we have to have a mindset in our party that Scotland and the Scottish elections next year are probably the most important elections, certainly in Scottish recent history, if not for decades, and are vital for our, not just our country, but for our party. So for me, making sure our mindsets in campaigning, in media, across our whole party are focused on Scotland couldn't be stronger. I have a little background on this. My first job in the Liberal Democrats I got from Jim Wallace, who was then the chief whip. I worked as chief of staff to Ming Campbell, and I've got many Scottish friends across the party. So I'm always reminded of the need that the view that the Scottish Liberal Democrats are a separate party. We have three parties: the Welsh Party, the Scottish Party, and the English Party, all within the federal umbrella. And the English Party is probably the enfant terrible. It's got to sort itself out. And that might help the mindset change. But finally, yes, we need to get that mindset right. And that mindset that Scotland is vital to the future of our party. But we've also got to try to change the mindset across Parliament. And I found the Tories just do not understand Scotland. They may have a few more MPs, but they don't get it. And that means there's a big responsibility on us to make sure that people in Scotland hear from England and from Westminster, not just the horrible Brexit Tory voice, but they know that there are people in Westminster who will stand up for Scotland, who aren't nationalists, who aren't Tories. And I think that's really an important message if we're going to stop the nationalists and stop the Tories.
Thank you, Ed. I just have one more question on the Constitution, and then we'll take a diversion over to policy. That question is an oldie but a goodie, and I think it's particularly relevant now as the SNP are banging the drums ever louder for India Ref 2. So how will you, as leader of the Liberal Democrats, justify a position against a second Scottish independence referendum after we spent such a long time campaigning for another referendum on Europe. Ed, if you'd like to go, and then Layla.
I'd like to put this in two parts, if you like. If I was asked the question ahead of the Holyrood elections, my answer would be what I've been saying and what Joe Swinson's been saying for a long time. Namely, that there was a referendum just a few years ago. The people supporting Scotland staying in the British family was quite significant, 55 to 45. And that was not based on sort of the zero manifesto from the Brexiteers, but it was based on quite a detailed manifesto that the Labour Party, the SNP, sorry, had put forward. So, you know, I think we need to be, you know, really clear on that. And I also think that not only just challenging the SNP, but making sure that, you know, we are seen to speak for all of Scotland. That will be absolutely critical. And then you get to the point of the Holyrood elections. There may be a challenge after the Holyrood elections if they get a majority, and they get a majority in a legitimate way. So, you know, I think this could be an issue which we will come back and need to debate, with Scottish Liberal Democrats giving the steer to the Federal Party. But I think as we go into the Holyrood elections, we should be opposed to that another referendum. I think we should speak for the family of Great Britain, and, you know, I think we should say that yes, we wanted another referendum on the EU, but that was about a confirmation referendum, very different from what is proposed by the SNP.
Thank you. Ed, Layla, if you'd like to give your answer, please.
Thanks very much. Yes, so this is a question. I've been asked this on Newsnight and Ian Dale and all sorts of other things, and it is that, you know, whilst on the one hand they wanted another referendum, the fact is they knew what they were voting for. It was 600 pages, that document. It was fairly detailed, if a bit repetitive in parts. And so when we continue to make the case for the union, we make the point that people have had their say, they knew what they were voting for, and they rejected it. And as we move up towards Holyrood elections coming up now, we do have to be super careful, because I think what's going to happen in terms of the dynamic is the SNP are going to use the Tories as their bogeymen. They're going to use Boris Johnson as the reason for wanting people to vote SNP. Look what a brilliant job Nicola Sturgeon's done. Look how awful Boris Johnson is. Wouldn't it be great if we were in charge the whole time? Well, that's just unhelpful. First of all, when Boris Johnson came up, when was it, day before yesterday? I don't know if Alistair Carmichael saw him, but he was on our turf and holding up massive crabs in his hand in the classic Boris Johnson Photoshop way. Why on earth did he not meet with Nicola Sturgeon to talk about the graveness of coronavirus and the economic recovery? And I called Willie up about this just before doing an interview on it. And I think his line was absolutely right. They need to grow up. And there is space in Scotland for a grown-up party that is challenging the SNP, and all credit to Willie for his doggedness in doing that, and to not let the SNP off the hook. They are going to say to people, vote for us to get rid of Boris Johnson. Well, we've got that message too. The Liberal Democrats are going to stand up to Boris Johnson in Westminster. I do not want us to even get in the position where the SNP have any legitimacy in wanting to call for a second Indie referendum. We need to avoid that. That's why we need to make these Scottish elections a strategic priority for the party. I'm so looking forward to coming up and campaigning for you. And as to what happens after that point, actually, that's a matter for the Scottish Party. Ruth, I think you're on mute again.
Okay. I'm just going to keep it off mute, and if my dog barks, my dog barks. Okay, so I think we will take a break from the Constitution for now. I'm going to resolutely keep an eye on my mute button as well, as I look at these great questions that are coming in. There's a lot of interest on that topic. But I would like to pivot a little bit over to policy for now. And I think I'll kick off with, Kirsten has asked on YouTube, which of the three E's, economy, environment, and education, from Layla's first question, do you consider to be the most important as a policy point going forward, and why? So Layla, if you can start with that one, and then Ed, please.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, when I developed these three pillars, initially, actually, it was education in the environment that I was focusing on, but that was before coronavirus. And it was based on conversations I was having around the country, because I wanted to answer the question, you know, what's gone wrong? What do we need to change? I went to Yorkshire, I went to Kent, I went to Wales, I went to Devon and Cornwall, and I was about to come to Scotland, and then coronavirus intervened, and I was bitterly, bitterly disappointed. So I can't wait to be able to come out door knocking with you, to talk to your voters about this with you. In terms of which of those three is the priority for the country right now, I think they're all very, very important. I think there is space for that broad liberal agenda. And that's what I'm trying to put across. You know, Charles Kennedy did this really, really effectively. It was able to win votes from all sides. And I think there's been a lot of focus in the party about we need to win seats off the Tories. Well, actually, a lot of the seats that we need to win are off the SNP. So we need to make sure that we've got messages that are broad in that sense. But the economy really does matter. And what I've been talking about is making sure that in this massive downturn that we're about to have, that people understand that the Liberal Democrats care and that they will protect them. And I care as much about the economy in Scotland as I do about England, as about anywhere in the United Kingdom. We are better off working together on this. And by supporting Scotland, that shows that we care, and that's the emotional case for the union. The union works. It works because they've taken these slightly different stances on coronavirus and the approach to coronavirus, but we've done it together. It's been allowed to be different because it's the right thing to do in that area, and that's localism at work. So I would argue that what we've seen over the last few weeks and months is a strong argument for keeping the union together. And the Liberal Democrats, I think, have been at absolutely the forefront of showing the SNP up for their failures in it, in particular education, in particular childcare. And the environment is equally important, because that is going to be the next big challenge. COVID-19 is going to look like a dress rehearsal compared to what we're going to face with the climate emergency. All three are important, but that's why I added the economy after I started with two pillars, because of coronavirus.
Yep, I'm not on mute. Thank you so much, Layla. Ed, if you'd like to answer that question, please.
Well, given education is devolved, as federal leader, I'm going to talk about the economy and the climate, where some are devolved, but much isn't. I think from the voter perspective, I think the economy is going to dominate over the next few years. The job losses, the business collapse, you know, we really are in a really difficult situation. And Scotland's got the added problem, I think, with the oil and gas industry being hit, particularly with the low level of the oil price and the need to move to a green economy. So there's a real challenge in the economy in Scotland. My own personal favourite is the environment. Well, how I got into the party in the first place, when Paddy and people like Simon Hughes were talking so lyrically about the need to protect the environment. And I like to bring the environment and the economy together. That's why in this leadership election, I'm talking about a greener economy, because I think my experience as an economist, I've got a degree in economics, and I put myself through night school for my postgrad. I've been involved in economic policy for the party for a long time, as well as my experience as a cabinet minister on climate change, where I nearly quadrupled Britain's renewable power. I think bringing those experiences together can give me credibility on a greener economy agenda. And I really want to take it to the SNP on this. I get fed up of the SNP saying they're responsible for all the renewable power in Scotland. No, they are not. Liberal Democrats are. The vast majority, it's because of our policies. And I want to take the SNP on that. I want to say that not only do we have the best record, and I know we do, but we know how to take it to the next stage. So if you want a greener economy in Scotland, look to the Liberal Democrats. And whether it's not just renewables, whether it's carbon capture and storage, which would be so crucial, whether it's the hydrogen economy, I think there's some really exciting examples where we could really make some headway in the electorate, the voters, by offering jobs, but offering a distinctive green vision too.
Thank you, Ed. We'll move on to a different area now. We've had a couple of questions on this, one from Jason and one from Jamie, around the issue of what do you believe are the benefits and costs, both for the individual and for the state, of universal basic income, if I can make it through that. So Ed, if you'd like to start with that.
Well, universal basic income was the first thing I did for the party when I became the economics advisor back in 1989. Paddy Ashdown was very keen on the idea. We developed something called citizens' income with the late great Nancy Sear, and it was our party policy from 1990 to 1995. And I remember when we looked at it in some detail then, the real beneficiaries were a mixture of the most vulnerable in society, homeless people, people escaping domestic violence, young people who are transiting all over the country. But the other big beneficiary, by far the biggest in terms of numbers of people, are carers, unpaid carers, of which there are millions across the UK, and there are hundreds of thousands in Scotland. And as I said in my opening remarks, I want us to focus on caring as an issue. I hope I can persuade and work with the Scottish Liberal Democrats so that you can do that, because it's mostly devolved. And I would like us to be the voice of those carers, the young carers, the adult carers. And I think if we do that, I think we can really cut through. And I think it would show the importance of a UBI. Now, the problem with the UBI, of course, is the cost. How do you pay for it? Having made did all the maths back in 1989-90, it's not as expensive as you think. Most people won't get it because they're already getting a citizen's income, a basic income, in terms of their tax allowance, in terms of their pension. So it's a much smaller group who get extra cash. And I put forward the idea in this leadership election of creating a sovereign wealth fund. And how would you do that? We have lent huge amounts of money to businesses across the UK. Not all of that will be repaid. And I think we do a debt for equity swap. The government, if the companies cannot pay the money back, the government takes shares instead, and that goes into the sovereign wealth fund. And the dividends from those shares help pay for a UBI. So I think it's really attractive because it helps the most vulnerable, it helps carers, and I can see through my experience and through this idea I put forward how we could pay for it.
Thank you, Ed. Leila.
Well, let's remember for a second why we're exploring this in the first place. And that's because universal credit is not working. And on the first day of lockdown, my post bag exploded, 3 times as many people contacting me. And the vast majority of them were because they'd lost their jobs. They were incredibly worried about how they were going to survive on universal credit. And we need something else. And then coronavirus has presented us with these stark realities about inequalities and about the fact that there are people falling through the cracks all the time. All credit to Jamie Stone and the work he's doing on the excluded group. We know that there are people falling through the cracks day in, day out. And that's why I've supported a universal basic income. And I came to it during coronavirus because actually the corollary, the other question is, how could you let them fall through the cracks? We cannot. We have to find a way of supporting them. And in terms of what it would do and who it would benefit, the fact is that you can do lots of studies, but we also need some real data. And that's why I'm part of a group in Parliament that meets regularly to talk about universal basic income. And I support the Fife trial. There is the trial for 3 years, citizens' basic income scheme to replace the benefit system. And that would be utterly groundbreaking, because what we need is the data to understand how does it affect people. And I hope that what we'll see is what we saw in the trials in Finland, where it improves well-being and it helps people in the longer term to be healthier, happier and make better choices. So it's a really liberal policy. It's a part of my platform, and it's one that I would continue to support, I hope, although of course it's up to the parties to make the policies, but I hope it's one that you agree with and that I can convince the party as a whole that it's something that we want to go back to.
Thank you so much for that. Now a slightly more left field, but this question does involve a great pun. What role do you, if any, do you believe that cannabis has to play in our green recovery, and what are your views on our policy with regards to the legalization of cannabis and other drugs? Sorry, Layla.
Right, okay, thanks, Ruth. Well, yes, I don't know if that's a pun or not. I'm trying to think, you know, is it, obviously our own policy is that we want to move to a public health approach, and that's the right way of going. I've worked for a number of years with families who are looking for another approach to drugs more generally, and taking a public health approach to drugs is, in my view, absolutely the right way to do it. So I do support our policy. Whether or not growing lots of weed is going to be the thing that drives a green recovery, I'm not totally sure about that. I actually do think a green recovery is the right thing to do right now, but actually it's more linked perhaps to retrofitting homes, to biodiversity and tree planting. Actually, when you look at studies of if you're going to turn the economy around after coronavirus, what's the best way of doing it? The Smith School in Oxford did one of these studies quite recently. Actually, a greener recovery is the best bang for buck that you can find. So I totally support a green recovery. I support our party's policy on cannabis, taking a public health approach and not criminalizing people for something that actually in the end only causes spirals. We have to make sure that we also make sure that, you know, medicalized cannabis and the work that Christine Jardine has done with the boy with epilepsy in her constituency, all credit to Christine. I've also got a constituent in that same position. We have to make sure that across the piece we take a measured, research-based, evidence approach to these kinds of issues.
Thank you, Layla. Ed, please.
I've been doing an awful lot of work on the green recovery, and I've seen many versions. I haven't seen cannabis as an issue within that. I'd like to understand a bit more on that, but I wouldn't say it's the first place I go for a green recovery. But I do support our policy on cannabis. And I think the way people like Alex Cole-Hamilton and Christine Jardine have been working on that, I think has been amazing, particularly for their constituents. And just let's remember, you know, there's been a war on drugs for a generation across the world. It's just not worked. Misuse of drugs has never been worse. And so we need an evidence-based approach, looking around the world for the best examples, because otherwise we're failing our children, our young people. We've got to get this right. We've been failing so much in the past. And I generally think the liberal approach is the right one. We need to treat it as a health issue. We need to actually to treat it as a poverty issue as well. It's got many different aspects to it. And you know, what I don't get from the Tory and right-wing side on this is that you've got to remember, this is the way to get the criminals. And the criminals use cannabis as a sort of drug to get people into their control. Let's go and get the criminals. Let's go and get the drug barons. And I think our cannabis policy would enable us to do that. Get the really evil people, protect the more vulnerable people, and actually doing it by a more freedom approach, I think is the right way. We can, you know, as we've said before, we can get tax revenue. We have a regulated market, and that can fund the drugs rehab. It can fund the drugs education. It can fund the police. You know, there's quite a number of things if you completely turn the focus on it. So, you know, I'm pleased that we've taken the lead on this over time, and delighted that Christine in particular has done so much good on it.
Thank you so much, Ed. Our next question comes from Isabel, and her question is, how can we have better conversations and ensure greater understanding around issues relating to the Gender Recognition Act? Ed, if you'd like to start with that one, please.
Well, it's a really good question. I mean, I strongly support our policy. I think it's, if you're a party that believes in equality and diversity, I think the policy we've adopted is the right one. But let's remember, it is not accepted by quite a lot of people in the country. And the real question when you're in politics is, I'm in politics to win. And part of winning is persuading people. In no way should we move away from our principles, but we have to try to understand the other person's point of view, not to agree with it, but try to work out why they take that view, what are their concerns, and then gradually explain to them why they're wrong in our view. And the concern, I think this may lie behind the question, that some of the debate on this has become very, very acrimonious. And I can understand why. I mean, people feel very strongly about it. I feel very strongly about lots of things. But there's a danger that it's become so heated that people aren't listening. Even from our side of the argument, where we are supporting trans rights and want the reform of the Gender Recognition Act. And you're seeing it played out in the Tory party, and the SNP. Both the Tory party and the SNP are riven by this issue. We are basically united, and that shows we're true liberals. But just watch how the other parties are tearing themselves apart on this. And, we mustn't. And the best way we will win is by, working with the Penny Mordaunt's in the Tory party, who are of a very similar view to us, people in the SNP maybe, and in helping them to make the reasonable case that we want to make. Not only can we win the case for equality, but maybe we'll see their parties in even more trouble. So let's have that conversation. Let's work cross-party on it, and let's be clear where we're going. But let's really listen. I think it's important that in any argument, if you want to win it, you work out where the other person's coming from.
Thank you so much, Ed. Layla, if you could go, please.
Well, I was asked about this just this week. I did the Nick Robinson Political Thinking podcast, and I give a very full answer there. So I'll do a shortened version here. I mean, first of all, I'm really proud of our party, that we haven't torn each other apart over this. I remember doing a panel event where there was an SNP member in the audience who, just talking about this, was rolling out misinformation after misinformation after misinformation. And one of the key bits of misinformation is to equate trans women with predatory men. Those are two entirely different things. And I've always argued that we're all on the same side here. We are on the liberal side here. Liberalism means standing up for every person so that they aren't held back by things they don't choose, whether that be their gender. And if they are finding themselves in a position where they're under attack, which is what is happening with the trans community, we absolutely have to stand by them. But you also need to then find arguments that bring people along the other side. And one of the bits of the debate that I think is quite interesting is that those who say that they want to protect women's rights by having only people who identify as women in changing rooms or toilets use them. Let's just take that as the one example. Guys, as a woman, I find that an affront on my rights, because how on earth are you going to police that? Am I going to have to now carry a card that says I am a woman and I meet a government definition for what that is? No, what utter nonsense. Trans women have been using toilets and changing rooms for years. The reason why people don't notice is because actually they're more likely to be the ones using the private cubicle because of the changes that are happening in their body. They deserve our love, our support, our compassion. There is a great track record in Scotland of equality organisations working together for rights for all. It's a great liberal principle. We shouldn't be giving it up. and I will continue to stand firm in my support for the trans community.
Thank you very much for that. We've had a couple of questions in relating to issues within the party and the makeup of the party. And I will just get the full text of this because it's a slightly lengthy question, but it is an important one. It comes from Emma, who says, we have a distinctive problem with sexism and misogyny in the Scottish Party, and it's widely acknowledged that the complaints process doesn't serve fully either the complainant or the accused. As party leader, how involved in eradicating sexism do you intend to be, and what do you think needs to happen to create real cultural change so we can truly advance gender equality in both the Scottish Party and the wider Liberal Democrats? Leila, if you could start with that one, please.
Thank you. Well, Emma, misogyny has no place at all in our party. It's got no place at all in our society. And I have to say, when I was a younger candidate working my way up in the party, I've experienced some pretty horrible things, men wanting to take advantage. And then when I was looking to report it, some women suggesting that I really shouldn't for the sake of my career. And I was really, really shocked when that happened to me. And what shocks me still is that that kind of conversation can still happen in the party. Don't be a bother. Don't get yourself into trouble. It will be bad for you. And this, I have to say, is a culture that needs to change. And I know that the Scottish Party is changing, and I know that you guys are doing something about this now, and all credit to Willie and others who are helping to drive that, and every single person who is raising these issues. But we need to recognize that this is still an issue in the whole of our party. And when I was sitting on the committee that was trying to tackle these issues in Parliament, one of the things we introduced was training that all MPs are encouraged to go on. It's called Valuing Everybody. And it makes people understand that because they are in positions of power, and you know, political parties can be quite hierarchical, there are power issues all the time, because ultimately these are about issues of power. That if they understood their own position better, and if people could understand that the way that they were coming across, or if they see it in someone else coming across in a certain way, that they can challenge that. And I think the job of the leader is to set that ethos within the party. There is no place for bullying and harassment of any kind in the Liberal Democrats. Under my leadership, you can be assured that I will take this incredibly seriously, work with those who want to push us in a positive direction, and continue to improve.
Thank you very much, Leila. To your response, please.
Well, Emma, sexism is completely unacceptable in our party and the wider world. Misogyny is completely unacceptable. You know, I'm conscious as a man, I may not be as aware of it as much as women are, but you know, my wife has told me many stories where she's been the victim of sexist behavior, including in our party. So I'm absolutely committed that we deal with it, top to bottom, that we have people in place to deal with it, we have the complaints procedure, that we have support, that people feel empowered to speak out. I guess we'll never be able to do enough. We've always got to be looking to improve it so people feel safe, people feel welcome, people feel equal. And as leader, I would set that tone, I would set that direction. And I believe I have been doing that. And, you know, working, for example, in Parliament, I was shocked to hear that the parliamentary staff, their complaints procedure, which included bullying, harassment and sexist behavior, had not been properly sorted out. And so I asked the amazing Wendy Chamberlain to sort it out, and she's made huge progress, and real credit to Wendy for doing that. But you absolutely have my word. Under my leadership, sexism and misogyny will be driven out, and I will empower the people in charge of the complaints procedure and the support procedure, the pastoral care, to be there and to be strengthened.
Thank you very much. Obviously an issue close to my heart, so thank you both for those answers. The next question is on a similar subject, but it goes a little bit broader. This is from Paul, who says, our party and elected representatives are often described as white, male and middle class. In recent years, we've seen action on the first two. As leader, what would you do to promote social equality in terms of who we are and, importantly, what we say? And if you'd like to start with that one, please.
Yeah, I mean, although we've made some progress on the issues around gender and the issues around ethnic background, I have to say we've got an awful long way to go. I think the gender issue has come some way. It's wonderful to be in a party with more women than men, and I think Joe Swinson should take a lot of credit for that. I think we've still got a long way to go on Black and ethnic minority representation. It's fabulous that both Layla and Manira can represent an ethnic background. I hope that Layla doesn't mind me saying that. It's really great. But we've still got a long way to go in the party. But the point you make, Paul, about the fact that we're middle class, I think is actually also a trouble. And just because it's not in the Equality Act as a protected characteristic doesn't mean it's not really, really important. And I think we need to more on it. We've become, I think, and I'm sorry to say this to the Scottish Party, we appear to be quite London-centric, quite southeastern-centric, and quite middle class. And we've got to sort that out. You know, I'm not to pretend I'm working class at all. I come from Nottingham, and 2 generations ago, my relatives were in the mines and in domestic service. But I'm middle class, and my desire though would be to make sure that we work out both in our policy positions and where we go and how we behave, that we make ourselves much more attractive to people from all different backgrounds. And that's partly having the right policies, talking about social justice, talking about the problems of low wages, talking about the problems of the gig economy and the lack of employment protection, sort of issues that, you know, Labour likes to claim it's got a monopoly on. But I think it's also about where we campaign and who we try to recruit to the party, making a positive effort to go and recruit in areas where we're not as represented. We've done a bit of that in Kingston over the years, and we've got a few people who I think would describe themselves as working class backgrounds, but they're in the minority. So I think, Paul, the question is spot on. I don't have all the answers, but it would be an issue that I'd like to work with you and work with the Scottish Party, because I presume it's not just the English Party in Kingston that's too middle class. I imagine you're saying, Paul, that there are parts of the Scottish Liberal Democrats who are too middle class too.
Thank you very much, Ed. Layla, please.
Thank you so much, Paul, for your question. I mean, let's start by making sure we understand why we care. You know, we care about this because if you don't have the diversity, the full glory of all the different parts of our community feeding into our policy processes, then how on earth can we be sure that we are making policies that are going to work for them? And that's why it's so important to challenge this. And yes, we are disproportionately, all of the things that you mentioned. And we have to make sure that whilst the parliamentary party is now more diverse, and that took a lot of work to get us there. I was on a thing called the leadership program for many years. I have to say I've been mentored through every point, every stage of my career until now, because there is a need to keep going back and saying to people, yes, you can do it. You know, yes, we can support you. But unless we start tackling that pipeline issue, unless we start tackling it at local party level, then we are going to not have that successive generations coming through to help us to do that. So my challenge to the party is this, and it's a very Lib Dem challenge, it's very bottom up. I would say, if you're a local party and you look at your wider community, are you representative of the people that you want to represent? It's a very simple question. And what that tackles is, if you are a party that comes from an area that is disproportionately white, well, actually, you're going to find it hard to recruit people from a BME background. You should try, and you should go to your local mosques, and you should go to your Hindu temples, and you should try. But if you're an area, say in some parts of London, where actually more than 50% or even more than that of your community is Black and minority ethnic, you need to be making a real effort to invite them into the party and ask over and over and over again. That's what I've been doing here in Oxford, West and Abingdon. When I go and campaign with a community, I then ask them over and over and over again to join. The reason we want to do it is because we are liberals. We believe in the beauty and the diversity of the whole of the United Kingdom, every single part of it. And if we're going to seriously tackle the issue of being very middle class, then I think we also need to tackle on its head the cost of running as a candidate, of getting involved in politics. It's expensive. And I know that in the Scottish Party, you've got an election fund that you give out to people from groups who might not be able to afford. There's also a disability fund, is my understanding. That has been cut back in England. And that's something that I do think is a wise investment for the party. Let's make sure that there is nothing that holds you back if you want to hold political office with the Liberal Democrats. And the more that we look like our communities, the better we're going to be at representing them.
Thank you so much. So we'll move on to, we've had probably most of the questions we've had in have been about how do we win votes, which I suppose makes a lot of sense. So I'll start with Molly's question. Molly's a PPC for the Scottish elections next year and says in her constituency she's found that we are losing large numbers of the youth vote to the SNP. They cite the coalition and a lot of other reasons as to why they're not voting for us. What are the kind of main ways that you would be seeking to win youth votes back in Scotland? Layla first, please.
Thanks, Molly. Well, what you're describing there is something that I'm hearing across the whole of the country. I mean, remember, the youth vote used to be our vote, and it's because we were liberal and anti-establishment. We took positions that were really distinct from the other parties, and we had leaders like Charles Kennedy, who was actually the first politician I ever saw that I really connected with as a person at university. And it was, you know, because of his stance on Iraq, and it was the first march I ever went on. He really inspired me. And that is how we are going to start to win back the young vote. We need to move on from coalition by electing me. It is a clear signal that that is what we are doing, that we aren't disowning it. What we're saying is that we've learned from it and we're moving forwards, and it will make those younger voters look at us again. But that's not enough. We then need that distinct, bold, liberal message to give to them. And I think the environment, you know, the biggest issue facing the planet, the thing that people have been striking over, children have been choosing not to go to school on Fridays because they are so passionate about this. And I, in the last Parliament, as a result of those strikes, called the first debate on the floor of the House on climate change in 2.5 years. I worked cross-party with Caroline Lucas and Ed Miliband to bring Greta Thunberg, who is such an inspiration to so many young people, to Parliament to address parliamentarians. We need to show young people that on the issues that they really care about, we get it, and that in our party, they see a party that stands up for the things that really matter to them.
Thank you very much, Layla. Ed, please.
Well, first of all, let me take the coalition issue front on. I don't know why Layla talks about tuition fees, because they don't exist in Scotland. So that hardly links to the coalition. And in the general election review, what was really clear is there were many problems our party faces. But in the long list of things that the general election review says we got to do, it wasn't really the coalition. There's many other things. And let's remember, in May 2019, we had excellent local election results. We had our best ever European results, and our leader had been a coalition cabinet minister for 5 years. In 2017, we had a leader who'd voted against all the controversial measures in the coalition, and it didn't work. So I think it's a bit more complicated. That it's very oversimplistic, and I think dangerously so, because if we think that's all you need to do, we won't be putting all the many other things right, which need the focus of the next federal leader. And, you know, I would want, if I was on that doorstep in that election, trying to win those votes, I want to attack the SNP back. You know, I would say to the young person, why are you going to the SNP? It made such a dreadful record on education. Look, you know, education slipped backwards because of the SNP. I'd attack all their waste and actually their failure on young people. I think there's a really quite an easy attack on the SNP, and we need to make that in the media, in campaigning, to win back many of those people. And then we need a really positive message for young people. And in my experience of 20 years as an MP and 30 years in the party campaigning, young people's issues do change over time. Clearly, they're very excited on climate. And given I nearly quadrupled Britain's renewable power, I think I'm the credible leader to talk on the climate. I remember showing how the work I was doing was bringing jobs to young people, green jobs. So I think I could really get that climate agenda over to them. But I'd want to listen. I'd want to make sure we were on their real radar, what their concerns were. So I'm finding that in my constituency, the concerns of young people at the moment are actually housing, affordable housing. They're worried about jobs. Actually, here in Southwest London, they're worried about knife crime. So, you know, some people try to say young people are this homogenous group. They're not. Young people differ in their views and differ in different parts of the country, even in different streets, right? So let's listen to young people. Let's make our positive liberal Democrat position, whether it's on devolution, whether it's on, you know, climate or jobs or housing, but let's actually go for the SNP. They have a disastrous record actually on domestic politics in Scotland, and that's not heard loud enough. They try to stop people hearing it. Let's make sure we get that over.
Thank you very much. Our next question comes from Jodie, who is a new member, and she has asked, how would you go about convincing ageing and other more naturally small C Conservative voters about the positive benefits of immigration to the country? Ed, if you could start with that one, please.
I'm really pleased you mentioned immigration. I was the Home Affairs spokesperson when we put forward a very liberal immigration policy, I think 2 years ago. And Christine Jardine, our Home Affairs spokesperson, who's supporting me in this leadership election, she's been doing a great job in the House of Commons, speaking up for the rights of asylum seekers, for example, that they should be able to work while they're waiting for their case to be heard. But you know, the question, Jodie, and welcome to the party, the question was, how do you get that over to those small Conservatives, maybe more mature in age? I would actually talk about the health service. I'd talk about care homes. I'd talk about the people that they rely on. Because I don't know if it's the case in your area, Jodie, but certainly in my area, our health service would literally collapse if it wasn't for people who trace their background to families who were not from our country, to immigrant families. You know, take the EU citizens. 10% of the staff at my local hospital are EU citizens. I actually have the most diverse population of any Liberal Democrat constituency that's held at the moment. We have large numbers of Tamils from Sri Lanka, Gujaratis from Northwest India, Muslims mainly from Pakistan, but also from Syria, Iran, Iraq. I helped set up a Gurdwara for our Sikh populations, mainly from East Africa and from Afghanistan, asylum seekers. We have the largest Korean population in Europe, actually. So I represent a pretty diverse population. I've been working with the communities for 20 years. And I could say to any Conservative voter that if they care about the NHS, if they care about care homes, if they're worried about their relative who's in the care home, and they want to oppose immigration, they should be careful what they wish for. And I have always campaigned on the positive side of immigration. That, I think, is what Liberal Democrats should do. You know, we have respect for every human being, no matter their race, no matter their passport, their gender, their sexuality, their age, their abilities. You know, equality of respect for people is fundamental to our values. And when you apply that to the issue of immigration, we have to stand strong. And yes, we have to reach out to the sorts of voters you're talking about and explain in language that they can understand, not necessarily our philosophy, but language that they can understand what the benefits of immigration. And yes, be reasonable, but also be emotional. Make sure you make that emotional argument that do they care so much about stopping immigration that they'd risk their health and their care? And I think you can change people's minds if you take that approach.
Thank you very much for that. Ed, Layla, if you'd like to answer, please.
Well, I've always had a positive view of immigration. We are an aging country as a whole. If we want an economy that is going to continue to thrive, actually one of the big challenges that we face is that we need younger workers to come in. And one of the consequences of Brexit and the changes that Priti Patel, one of my least favourite people on the Tory benches, is bringing in, is that that's just going to make it so much harder for us to be able to do the jobs that this country needs. And one of those there's a huge shortage of at the moment, and credit to Alex Cole-Hamilton for raising this so much, is the massive GP shortage in Scotland. We've got 1 in 4 GP places unfilled. Now, where are those GPs going to come from? Because it takes years to be able to train new doctors. And actually, it's also very expensive. And there are incredible doctors around the world waiting to come here to work in this country. But if you are a junior doctor, and if you are thinking about coming to the UK, first of all, you have so many hoops to jump through that you might not consider it somewhere you want to be. We've also got, care workers, nurses, places that need filling. You're looking at a system that is an incredible system, and we all love our NHS, but is under so much strain. And then you look at Brexit, and you look at the rhetoric coming from Boris Johnson, and you think to yourself, would I really be welcome there? And that's the problem. So if I was talking to someone who is elderly, someone who's aging, someone who's, small c conservative and concerned about immigration, I would use specific examples like that and say, actually, probably they'll have had experience of someone who was an immigrant treating them in a hospital, and then make the point that we need an immigration system that encourages them to come, that they are helping us, and to continue to make that positive case to them.
Thank you very much for that. So we've had a few questions, obviously, about how do we deal with the SNP, unsurprisingly. And one question that's come in from Gus is, how would you best highlight our consistency and our lack of hypocrisy as the only party which is both explicitly pro-UK and pro-EU, given the various track records of other parties? Layla, if you'd like to start with that one, please.
No, thank you. Well, Gus, thank you so much. And actually, it's one of our strongest arms right now, is that we are entirely consistent in our approach to how we tackle cooperation. Liberalism is all about working together. It's very much my leadership style as well, by the way. I think that the way that we should be structured as a party is collaboration between all regions and nations in our country. And my job as the leader is to make sure I'm listening to all, to seek consensus, and to try and make sure that we end up working in the same direction rather than trying to pull it apart. And actually, this applies just as much to the United Kingdom as it does to the international rule-based order. It's why we wanted to be part of the European Union. It's why I will continue to make the positive case for the European Union at a time when Boris Johnson looks to be taking us off that cliff edge of no deal. That would be utterly catastrophic for our country. It would hit the economy at the point when it's already down. We have to stop this and make the case. And as if we diverge and he looks to Trump to get that trade deal at the expense of our own prosperity here, I think that argument for the EU is just going to grow and grow and grow. Meanwhile, we have an SNP that wants to detach itself from the rest of the UK in the hope that it's just going to be easy as pie to join the European Union. And that's just not going to be the case. So I do think that we need to expose that to an extent when the time is right. And it's an utterly inconsistent position, because they want to hide behind their identity politics and use that to drive a wedge between us. But it's inconsistent with the idea of working with others internationally. We have to come back to that very liberal approach. To work together is to be strong together. If you can be together, you can still be yourself. And we can make that argument uniquely as liberals.
Thank you very much for that, Layla. Ed, please.
Well, I think Willie Rennie, as the Scottish leader, has made the pro-UK, pro-EU case so strongly for such a long time, consistently since 2011. And I think he deserves huge credit for going out there and selling our party in that very strong, principled way. And frankly, I would always want to listen to Willie about how you take it forward. I mean, it does seem to me that without his leadership and without the campaigning that so many you have done on that message, we might not have got back Jamie and Wendy and Christine. And so, I think it is a strong message. But going forward, I think, there's a real interesting point in Scottish politics at the moment, because, Labour have disappeared and are still hopeless, still led by a Corbynista. Then you've got the Tories who now are, making themselves extremely unpopular. Now Ruth Davis has gone, all those sort of One Nation type Tories that there were in the Scottish Tory Party for a period, they seem to be going on because they don't like Brexit, actually, a lot of them, and they don't like Boris Johnson. So, I think there's a massive responsibility on us, because with the Tories and Labour weak, who is going to oppose the SNP with strength? Now, let's be honest, we need to fill that gap. We need to be the alternative to the SNP in Scotland, I think, but we're starting from a low base. So we've got to run, we've got to sprint, and we have got to be ambitious. Because, my friends, the responsibility for, I think, saving Scotland from the nationalists now falls to us. And that's a heavy burden, and it's going to be difficult. I don't make any bones about it. But let's recognize that is our task. And I want to work with Willie, the Scottish Party, to do whatever I can to make sure that we're up for that task next May and the May after, those massively important elections. And yes, we can show that the union is important for Scottish people's lives, and the SNP would be a disaster. Look at the economic dislocation that the SNP approach would take. The economy would be a disaster with them. Look at some of the COVID issues. Christine Jardine made a speech just 2 weeks ago in Parliament about this. I'm told even the Conservatives liked it, but she was making that strong case. I just want to end on this point, because it's a strategic point which may not come in the questions, but I'm worrying about. The SNP want to cheat in the next elections. They've created this party, the Alliance for Independence, I think it's called, so they can get votes on the list vote. And I want to talk to Willie and, all the campaigns in the Scottish Party about, what the implications of that for next May. Is this in some way illegal, illegitimate? And if it's not, how are we going to cope with it? Because if you share my view that with the Scottish Labour Party and Scottish Tories, frankly, leaving the battlefield, and it's now our responsibility, we have to rise to that. And we have to take the SNP on and be the pro-EU, pro-UK party that Willie has so brilliantly positioned us as. And I want to do everything in my power, all my energy, to help you prosecute that case and surprise everybody by how well we do over the next two set of elections in Scotland.
Thank you very much for that, Ed. We've had a couple more come in. I noticed that we are drawing close to the end of our time. One question that's come in from Steph is on the back of the 2019 election review. One of the things that has come up is an issue of feedback coming from the grassroots, from the membership base, being fed up. So what would your strategy as leader be for feeding responses from the grassroots and the experiences of the grassroots up into how you lead the party? Ed, if you'd like to start that one, please.
Well, let me tell you an anecdote which shows you it's not just the grassroots that sometimes don't get listened to. Now, during the last election, I went into HQ a few times and I said, the revoke policy isn't working. It's in fact, we've got to change it. And I was told time and time again that I was wrong. And I said, well, A, I'm getting that on the doorsteps. B, my canvassers are getting it on the doorsteps. And C, when I talk to friends around the country, they're getting on the doorsteps too. So, they weren't listening at a crucial moment to the grassroots. So it happens all the time. And I would like to make sure, I'll just take that particular point about canvassing and what is the message from the doorstep. I would want us to find a better way of using the, thousands of people who are talking to ordinary voters, week in, week out, to make sure that wonderfully precious market research, because that's what it is. Market intelligence, political intelligence, we use it in a better way. Because if Liberal Democrats are having all these conversations, thousands of conversations across the country on a regular basis, why aren't we finding a better way to process that, to feed into our strategy and our policy ideas? So that's one thing I'd like to do. And the new chief executive, Mike Dixon, in LDHQ in London, is looking at investing in a new tech platform. And this is the sort of thing that could potentially go into that. Another thing that I've already done as acting leader, I was worried after COVID that we needed to find a way to really get some exciting ideas. A bit, at one stage I was calling it Beverage 2. We think after COVID about the sort of new world. And what I decided to do was I wasn't going to do it myself as leadership candidate. I wanted the party to do it. I wanted the party to own it. So I talked about the FBC, the Federal Policy Committee. They looked at it. They came back with a fairly boring approach, I have to say. And I said, look, let's do it a different way. Let's use tech platforms. Let's use Zoom. Let's use some other clever platform to reach out to grassroots members so they can feed into a new, vibrant policy debate. And that is now being rolled out. It's called Policy Lab. I think about 2,000 plus people are using it in its pilot stage, its beta testing stage. And it will be a way of enabling the grassroots to really engage in policy ideas. So that's my answer, Steph. I think whether it's campaigning, getting that intelligence back, so it's really, really well thought through and captured, and through policy ideas, I'd like us to use technology in a way which we've never done before, so we really can bring in the grassroots. We've seen through lockdown, this amazing video conferencing technology. Do you know what? I never used Zoom before the lockdown. Maybe you had, I'd never done. I now spend my life on Zoom. And the big thing I take from it is it's made our party more of a village. We can reach out to every party. Layla and I are doing hustings all around the country, many of them. We later on we're in the northeast of England. Yesterday we were in Wales, and before that, I forget where we were, Layla, before that. I'm losing count.
It's all a blur, Ed. It's all a blur.
And tomorrow night we're in East Midlands. So what that means is, we can continue this. We can really reach out. And I think that will mean we can stop this London-centric nonsense. We can make sure our party, the English party, the Welsh party, the Scottish party, can talk to all their members. We can talk to each other. We can become, the federal Britain, the federal party, which we've always aspired to be. And I think that's quite exciting.
Thank you, Ed. And as I'm sure my ventures with the mute button will have proved, I'm certainly no Zoom expert either, so fair enough. Layla, if you would like to answer that one, please.
Thank you. Well, in terms of feeding into my office as leader, I've already decided that should I win, there will be a dedicated person in my office whose job it is to make sure that we are actively seeking out this kind of coordination, because there is nothing better than that intel from the ground. It's the reason why after the 2019 general election, I went to go door knocking. I wanted to speak to the voters myself, but of course the leader can't do that themselves, although I will of course continue to do a lot of door knocking, mainly because I love it. But we also in elections have to make sure that we are getting that intel and there is that clear line of communication. So that is a pledge from me. I will have someone in my office whose job it is to do this. And Zoom makes it so much easier to be able to feed in, but also hold the leader to account. It shouldn't just be twice a year for those who can afford to go to conference that you get to have a Q&A with the leader of the party. Actually, I'd like to do it much more often so that I can hear from campaigners directly what's going on and feedback on the messaging that we're putting out. But I think there is a specific issue around leaflets and around the fact that certainly in the past there were problems with Scottish members getting emails about things that were devolved. So you'd get perhaps some of the stuff that I was doing on education in England, but it's devolved, it's not applicable, and in fact it should have been something from Beatrice. It has to be something that we are holding front and center in our minds. And in general elections, I know that there is a lot of concern about the leaflets that go out in Scottish seats just not quite being of the right tone. They aren't responsive enough. We have to make sure that we don't let election spending rules determine our message. Instead, we should be having a much more decentralized campaigning approach. It's the thing that we say we do, but we don't always as a party live our values. And as leader, that's what I want to do. I want to draw out the best in the party in the same way that I pulled together that Build Back Better book before the leadership election started and sought voices from all across the party to try and give them an outlet to be able to have their incredible ideas heard. Our party is at its best when it is fizzing with ideas. As leader, I want to make sure that as a party, we go back to those kinds of ways. And if you've got an idea that's different, it isn't something that people go, oh no, we tried that 20 years ago, that could never work. No, we need a completely different ethos right now. 6 to 8% in the polls is not good enough. We are going to tackle this by reinvigorating every single part of the party. And I think my job of leader is to encourage the whole of the party to be grassroots, be bottom up, and be responsive to the constituents that they want to serve.
Thank you very much, Layla. We are now on to our final question, and it's been asked by so many people I wouldn't bother naming them. But thank you to everyone so far who has put in questions. They've all been brilliant. Apologies to those who haven't been called. But I will ask this one last question. As leader, will you be pushing to rejoin the EU? And if so, how? Layla, if you could start, please.
Thank you. I'm a proud pro-European. In fact, my father worked for the Commission for most of my life. We moved to Brussels when I was 1. I went to the European school. The very first flag that I drew was an EU flag. And I saw it as much a part of my identity as I did being British. And so I'm devastated by where this country has gone. And I'm proud that we took that stop Brexit stance that we did. It was the right thing on all sorts of different reasons. But actually, I think what we did fail to do was to make the emotional case for it. And actually, guys, this is the lesson we now need to learn as a party. It's how do we make that emotional case for these kinds of things? You know, it's speaking to people's hearts and not just their minds. The rational side of people's brain at the moment in elections actually is not as strong as their emotional response to the messages that we're putting across. So that's what we need to start with. We need to start making that case for why rejoin is the right thing for our country. For what it's worth, I think Brexit is going to unravel, but I'm not sure it's going to happen in time for the next election. What we can do now is to start showing people that by cozying up to Trump in a trade deal that results in the lowering of animal welfare standards, the lowering of environmental standards, this is the way that we're going to win over people, particularly in Brexit voting parts of the United Kingdom, which of course was not Scotland, and then slowly over time, win that argument. And as soon as that door starts to creak open, and I want to be a leader for the next 5-10 years. I very much hope that this is going to happen in the time that I am leader. As soon as that door starts to creak open, you have my assurance that we are going to be a party that will be first in line in that rejoin position. But I don't think it's quite there yet.
Thank you, Layla. Ed, if you could answer that one, please.
I'm not sure there's much difference between myself and Layla on this one, to be frank with you. I'm a passionate pro-European, and I want to lead a proud pro-European party. Having had the privilege of negotiating at the European Union on the economy, on the single market, on trade, and then on climate change, I know, but by being there, now our country is much bigger and more influential and can be a force of good in the world, and Brexit is an absolute disaster. The question is, of course, how do we move public opinion? When does public opinion shift? And given the disaster of the revoke strategy, we've got to think really quite carefully about, when we might be able to go back to rejoin. I think if we went too early, it could backfire. However, I think it's too early to say when we will be able to go to rejoin. If Brexit does unravel, if the trade deals don't happen or the trade deal is disastrous, and if you look at Trump, if you look at the tension between the US and China, and the tension between China and the UK, the chance of any big trade deals that we were promised happening, doesn't look like on the cards to me. And so the damage of Brexit will become, I think, more evident more quickly. The weakness of the UK in influencing things like climate, things like, the geopolitics of the world with this tension between the US and China, I think that will become ever more evident. And the real question is, how quickly does it become a reality for people in their lives so that their opinions are changed? And I don't know that. You have to have a crystal ball. If opinion changes markedly and quickly, then clearly it's possible to see us taking a rejoin position. Clearly, we want to be out there in the front of it when that does. But if we get out there too early, if public opinion hasn't changed, I think we're in a problem area. And one of the reasons I want to give us a bit of wriggle room is actually because of the Scottish position. The SNP will try and use it, and they'll try and say, Scotland could be back in the EU if we were independent. I think that's probably nonsense, and we should undermine that strategy. But if they use it as they would normally do to pump their disgusting grievance strategy, which really makes me fed up, must make you really cross. If they do it, I think we need to be able to have some wriggle room. So having that wriggle room by saying, look, it's just too early to say, and leaving that option open would actually help at the Scottish elections. So although I think it probably is unlikely that we can adopt rejoin strategy in the next election, I think it's unlikely. I wouldn't want to tie ourselves too down, because if opinion does change, then that gives us an opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much, Ed, and thank you for all the answers you've given so far. If I could invite you both to make a brief closing statement, and then we'll say goodbye. So Ed, if you could start with your closing statement, please.
Well, thank you for all your questions, and thanks to Ruth for chairing. I hope I've shown you that I have the vision, experience and judgment to lead the Liberal Democrats federally and to ensure the Scottish Party is properly supported in Liberal Democrat HQ. To work with the leader of the Scottish Party from day one, given how crucial next year's Scottish Parliament elections are, I want to work for that, for Scotland and for Britain. Together, we need to tackle the challenges, whether it's across the country or inside the Liberal Democrats. And I want to work with you all to build an economy where we invest in green jobs, build a fairer society, and give carers a much better deal. The Thornhill review of the general election shows us we've got many challenges and there's simply no quick fix. But I know that by working together, we can build a message and a party machine that can speak to Scotland and to the whole of the UK again with our strong liberal values. I've been touched by how many of the Scottish Party's great campaigners are backing my campaign. Christine Jardine, our fabulous MP for Edinburgh West. Jim Wallace, the best Deputy First Minister Scotland has ever had. Jenny Marr, one of the party's best campaigners and brightest hopes. Ming Campbell, I think you may have heard of him. Rosemary Bruce and her husband. The amazing Sheila Ritchie, Leah MacArthur, Ashley Guy, Fred McIntosh, Alan Reid, Jenny Dorr, and many more. I'm very grateful for their support. Together, let's campaign our socks off. Elect more Liberal Democrat councillors, more MSPs, more MPs. Yes, my friends, the challenges are serious with jobs, the climate, Brexit, COVID, and the SNP. They've probably never been more serious. But I'm ready for that challenge. And I'd be honoured to lead you to campaign for and win that greener, fairer, more caring future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. Leila, if you'd like to give your closing speech, please.
Thank you so much. Our party is at its best when it's bursting with new ideas, and I can feel that energy now. In these hustings, in the listening sessions that I've been holding, I can feel the burning ambition for our party from the bottom up. And now more than ever, our country needs bold, progressive, liberal ideas so that we can emerge from this crisis fairer, greener, and more compassionate as a country. But the challenge for the party is to rebuild trust and support so the Liberal Democrats can start delivering on our ideas and have a compelling vision for the country. With the right strategy the right message and leader, I know that we can do better nationally than single figure polling, that we can bolster your efforts in Scotland, that I as leader will support Willie Rennie and all the candidates in the run up to those all important Holyrood elections. But let's not forget the council by-elections that are coming first. Let's not forget the council elections in 2022. And we use that momentum towards winning seats in Westminster so that we across the whole country will be a stronger political force. Electing me as leader sends a clear signal to voters that we've learned from our mistakes and that we are a party moving forward and that we are serious about progressive change and taking on Boris Johnson. So in this leadership election, what I'm going to do is harness our brilliant ideas, harness our enthusiasm, grow our ambition, and use them to power a political comeback. Just like Paddy and Charles did, I will make liberalism mainstream again and appeal to that broad base of voters all across the United Kingdom at a time when it is needed more than ever. Please vote for me and let's move forward together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leila, and thank you to Ed as well. That's been really brilliant. Thank you to everyone who's watching. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. I won't take up any more of your Sunday afternoon. Have a great day. Goodbye.
Bye.